Next up, please welcome Ricky Burdett, the Director of LSE Cities.
Hello. I'm going to be talking about shaping cities and smarter cities. By shaping, I want to talk about literally the shape, the form of the city. And by smarter, I want to talk about the economic, the social, and crucially, the environmental aspect of that. I'm going to do that by talking globally. There is a lot of knowledge in this room about the United States, but I also want to focus in on a very important initiative that Bloomberg Philanthropies, the London School of Economics, and others have been involved in India. Now, you all know this map, I'm sure. Cities are growing enormously. We heard Mike Bloomberg talk about the numbers, but just look at the light pink in terms of where the growth is going to happen in the next 20, 25 years. They're all over the world, but there's a concentration in some parts of the world which is unequal, and that's Africa and Asia. We know the numbers. 2.5 billion people will be moving to cities by 2050. That's an extraordinary number, but 90% of this growth is actually happening in Asia and Africa. That's why we all need to talk about it, because what you do in the States, what we do in Europe, actually act as models for the rest of the world. So that's the point of saying that. It's not a sort of colonial approach. It's a description of what we need to do to understand each other. Those numbers, by the way, don't relate to climate change refugees. If you start putting in more and more people actually moving to cities because they're trying to get away from floods and from fires, it's going to add to that issue. I said I'd talk about form. This is what's happening. I know the mayor of Mexico City is after us. This is not a critique. This is a description of what actually happens to cities if we can't control the growth that we're talking about. The question in Africa, where something like 70 to 80% of growth is actually informal, uncontrolled, unplanned, is really fundamental here. We can talk about top-down planning, we can talk about getting mayors involved. Some of these places don't have mayors. Some of these places don't have policies. And the question for us is, talking about shaping cities, is what happens to the green bit when the housing on the right-hand side, the informal housing, is inevitably going to grow for people looking for jobs. That's why people come to cities. Take China. It's fantastic that there are representatives in the room from this extraordinary country, which is actually progressing the city debate in fantastic ways when it comes to sustainability. Take Guangzhou. This is a city. Look at those statistics. The population has grown. It's grown from something like 2 million to 25 million. But the most important statistic on this slide is that though the population has grown by only 1,000%-ish, its footprint has expanded by over 3,000. That's a map. The light color is how it was 25 years. The deeper green is how it is. Now, the whole point of this discussion is that these have consequences on the environment, on sociability, and that's why action needs to be taken. And that's why I'll talk about the Indian project in a moment. But the New York University Expansion Program has looked at 200 cities. Yes, populations have increased by nearly to 300%, we've heard those numbers, but look at the average increase in footprint, nearly 500% average increase in footprint, which means that density is dropping. And in terms of the environmental sustainability, that is absolutely critical. It may be unfair from Europe to come to the United States and make comparisons which are unfavorable to you. But take Berlin and Atlanta. These are two cities, roughly speaking, the same size in GDP. Berlin is compact, it's contained, it's controlled. 70% of its population uses public transport to go to work. In Atlanta, it's 80%. The impact of that is clear to everyone here. Why is India so important? India is so important for a number of statistical issues I'll come to, but because actually in its DNA, as some of you well know, there's a dense core to most Indian cities. So that's a fantastic asset, as long as you can make it equal and equitable for everyone who lives there. The risk is that they sprawl as they grow, and what can we actually do about that? Mike Bloomberg already talked about the extraordinary impact of the road statistics, pollution, not to mention traffic accidents. And this is, of course, what is happening in this extraordinary city of Delhi, but it could be many others around the world. Now, this issue is not the same everywhere. This is a map which actually shows you in red how urbanized Europe, which started, say, 1,000 years ago, urbanizing is. Nearly 73%. South and North America also very high. China is roughly 54% in a very, very short period of time, concentrated, as you can see, on the Pacific Rim. The extraordinary thing about India is that it's only 1/3 urbanized, and it's going to move very fast. So which way does it go is the question. And I think for all of us, but also the US, Canada, Australia, elsewhere, the way we go, the choices politicians in this room and elsewhere make are fundamental. This map, I don't want to go into detail, this graph, sorry, on the horizontal axis, on the bottom, as you move right, indicates better quality of life. You live longer, better education, etc. As you go up, you use more energy. Now, you can see there, it's pretty obvious, on the whole, in the last 100 years or so, things have meant that the more life gets better, the more energy you use. Way up at the top, USA, Australia, and other countries. Somewhere in the middle, the European compact city model, and take India. What are the choices? Which model do we actually choose? Well, density is at the heart of this discussion in terms of choices that, as I say, policymakers make, but also the effect it has on the way people can move in and out of these cities. We're talking about cities that you have 4-hour commuting times a day. 4-hour commuting times a day. Imagine what that means in wasted opportunities and productivity. And I have to say, I took this picture 3 days ago as I flew over Dallas. There's a long way to go here when it comes to questions of density. I don't see much density there. But China, I've already mentioned. There is a recognition of this issue. But much of the development that we're seeing happening there happens, yes, high density, but out on the edges of the city, in places which are difficult to get to. This is Istanbul. Looks like exactly the same question. The risk is that in those areas that are growing rapidly, and remember those statistics I gave you, Addis Ababa, it could be elsewhere in Africa, we're choosing exactly the same models. So what are the ways that we deal with cities and make them smarter? By smarter, I'm talking about not just technology, very important, not just energy, fundamental, but also transport and build form. There are examples. You can take the top-down model, which is the Chinese, let's make an ecologically smart city, and they build them, as we know. But, you know, there are few countries that can actually do that and have the political and economic system to do that. In Europe, we've been spending a lot of time recently trying to make do with spaces which are no longer unused, ex-industrial areas, and again, the United States has this problem, and it's a fantastic opportunity. Hamburg has done this very well, and we know so well, and many of the mayors are actually represented in this room, that Latin America has taught us questions of how to retrofit the city and make it try to make it grow in a sort of intelligent and smarter way. Medellin is a great example of linking transport initiatives like the cable car with social infrastructure so that the two are absolutely connected. Now this picture, I'm so proud to say, I took with the mayor of Bogota next to me from an open door Black Hawk helicopter 2 days ago. I was freezing and terrified. But why did I take that picture? Because it reminds us that a simple and important system, the Transmilenio bus, it's not a bus system, it's a high-speed system on rail, actually works fantastically in a city which is growing at an extraordinary rate. And you see it down on the ground, and you know, basically the cars go more slowly than the buses, or these BRT. And it changes completely the dynamics of the city. And the examples we're trying to use, modestly in London, we've been involved with the Olympics, to take areas like this, just like the transport idea, and make so much more as a result of an inner city site, bring jobs, bring opportunities, bring quality of life right where you need them, not out on the edges. This takes me to India. Why are we talking about India? Not only because it's large and important, it's the single biggest contributor to global urban growth in the next generation. 1 million youth join the workforce every month. What a fantastic opportunity in terms of actually getting it right. Now, what is fascinating, you saw that before, is that India's actually made mainly, not of megacities, we think of Delhi and Mumbai, etc., but actually nearly 8,000 urban towns. They're small today, but boy, are they growing. and nearly 600,000 rural villages. So you have a population of between a third is urban, but it punches way above their weight, the urban populations. 63% of GDP is from these cities. That's the same of the GDP of Germany and Japan, just to put things in context. But, and this is critical, 1 in 5 Indians are without electricity. The country has deep infrastructural issues. 330 million have severe water shortages. This is one of the problems that needs to be solved. We can't only play the issue at the sort of bigger political ground. Now, this is why I find, I must say, the India Smart Cities mission extremely interesting, because it is central government, federal government, taking decisions which hopefully in the next generation, this extraordinary moment of change, can promote economic growth, improve quality of life, provide or deal with that core infrastructure, get buy-in from citizenships, which in India is a serious issue, and promote inclusive development. And here we see Mike Bloomberg with Modi launching the initiative last year. Out of 100 cities, which submit in fact 98, 20 were selected, and they go from cities with 12, 11 million people to cities with 30, 40,000 people, actually. And they also submitted a whole series of fascinating proposals. The approach, and this is significant, different countries need to do different things, needed to engage citizenship. Why? Because actually in India, unlike thinking of who's here today, does not really have, I think I'm right in putting it, it's a bit strong, a strong mayoral system. It has a fantastically powerful state system, like the state of Texas, but that's remote. We're talking about states with 30, 40 million people. How do they know what people locally, in terms of a community, actually need? There are municipal corporations, but they're not very powerful. So the whole system was set up to try and get voices from different people. And these are the numbers that speak for themselves. 15 million people were consulted in this process. That in and of itself is significant. You actually trigger something that people keep in their memory. And it's done at very different levels, not just with surveys and things like that, but actually doing things on the street and on the ground. So what's new about this initiative? There have been other initiatives, right? We all can think of those in our own countries. The first thing is that the cities had to compete to get the money. And competition, as we know well, in the United States and elsewhere, helps get the best come up to the top. You just don't reside on sort of the traditional systems of networks of power and patronage. But also what was new about this was the fact that each city had to have a strategic vision within which the initiatives could end up being realized. So integrated planning, what does the city as a whole want? Area-based development, so that the shape of the city, as I showed you right at the beginning, becomes very important, and participation is central. We don't have time, nor is it necessary, to go through the details, but what is important is that many of the cities started saying, hey, we've got these big sites, like the London Olympic site, which are unused. We don't know we haven't ever thought of actually using them. Isn't this where we could actually put new housing, as long as they're well connected by public transport, and we actually do something with that? And as the government guidelines actually suggested, this is seen as a model to trigger other cities to actually copy. And that's one of the most powerful things that these national initiatives can do. There are a series of citywide, pan-citywide, more technical initiatives. There are a lot of initiatives which are in fact very, very spatial. You know, images that we have to deal with the infrastructure problems that we've already alluded to are represented by these different proposals, Udaipur in this case. It looks simple, but it's going to be so important if this is realized. Just changing the nature of the street or a market so that it becomes dignified and people can do their business and transactions in a way that is civilized is part of the smarter city argument. Similarly, here you see an image on the left, which is absolutely typical of so many cities, actually quite close to the city core and to one of its wonderful assets, the river. I know that the mayor of Bogota is very interested in doing similar things. This is what can actually be done. At the end, the most important thing here is that the competitive process is fed in to the DNA of a decision-making process, And for me, as an urbanist who thinks that the shape of the city, the way it's actually designed, the way it grows, is fundamental to economic, to social, and to environmental sustainability. That's the sort of question that we need to understand to steer and shape urban growth in the future. Thank you very much.